villages of County Clare, Ireland, locals still whisper about a cottage with a single window that wakes up at exactly 3:18 a.m. They say if you're standing outside at that moment, the glass won't show your reflection as you are, but as you will be 1 hour into the future, bleeding, crying, missing. Whatever the window shows always comes true. Tonight, I want to tell you what happened the night I saw myself in that window, and why I wish I'd never gone near it. I suppose every haunting begins with a simple decision, one you barely notice at the time, one that feels harmless until you understand what it cost you. For me, that moment was the night I agreed to house sit for my mother's cousin, Eileen, in a quiet stretch of County Clare known as Kilduff Road, a winding place, nothing but gentle hills, mossy stone walls, leaning with age, and the sort of stillness you only get in rural Ireland when the wind has nowhere urgent to be. Eileen's cottage sat at the very end of the road, past a bend where the hedges grew so high they almost touched. I'd been there before, once as a child, when everything seemed larger and more enchanted, but never long enough to know the land in any meaningful way. I remember the smell, though, sweet turf smoke, damp earth, and something faintly metallic in the mornings, like mist clinging to old iron. When she asked me to stay for a week, while she visited her daughter in Galway, I said yes before thinking too hard. I needed the quiet. My own apartment in Limerick had become a prison of unfinished tasks and intrusive thoughts, none of which seemed to care that I desperately wanted rest. So I drove up on a Thursday evening in late October. The sky was a bruised shade of violet, clouds layered like damp wool blankets. My phone lost service about 20 minutes before I reached the cottage, which didn't surprise me. Kilduff Road had always seemed like a place that technology forgot. I parked beside the front gate, a rusty iron thing that creaked like it remembered better days, and grabbed my bag from the back seat. The cottage looked exactly as I expected. Slate roof, whitewashed walls, and that single narrow window on the right side of the front door. The glass had a peculiar clarity to it, the kind that made reflections look sharper than they should. I didn't think much of it at the time. Inside, everything smelled faintly of chamomile and peat smoke. Eileen's living room was small, but warm. A stone hearth, a low sofa, a crochet blanket thrown over an armchair. A single lamp glowed on a side table, casting a soft amber pool across the wooden floorboards. There was a note waiting for me beside the kettle. Tea is in the cupboard. Sheets are fresh. Don't mind the stories the locals tell. They've been at those for generations. Eileen, I smiled at that. Country folklore was practically a sport in places like this. Tales of banshees, will-o'-the-wisps, fey rings, and phantom coaches. Half warning, half entertainment. I unpacked slowly, letting the quiet settle around me like a shawl. After boiling water for tea, I stepped outside for some air. My breath puffed white in the cooling evening. The village lay far behind, just a few scattered lights across the distant fields. Out here, darkness was something solid, an old neighbour with a long memory. As I stood there, I noticed it again, the narrow window beside the door. The glass caught the faint light spilling from inside the cottage. It was pristine. Too pristine. Not dusty, not weathered, not streaked like old rural windows tend to be. Just perfectly clear. When I glanced into it, my reflection looked normal, I suppose, though something about the angle made my face appear slightly elongated, like the glass had its own opinion. About proportions, I chalked it up to old craftsmanship. I didn't know then what that window was. Later, around midnight, I settled into bed with a book I had no intention of finishing. The sheets were cold, the blankets heavy in a comforting way. Outside, the wind had died completely, leaving only the occasional soft patter of something brushing against the exterior wall. Branches, perhaps. I drifted off. Hours passed, though I couldn't tell you how many. Sleep in places like this feels different, deeper, as if the dark itself is pulling you under. Then I woke, abruptly, with that strange sense that something has silently tapped your consciousness, not loud enough to be a noise, more like the mind recognizing a disturbance before the ears do. My phone's screen glowed when I checked it. 3:12 a.m. I didn't know why I was awake. No nightmares, no house creaking unusually, no rain or animals outside. Just a clean, sudden awakening. My throat felt dry. I decided to get a glass of water. The house was colder than before. I could see my breath faintly in the dark hallway as I walked toward the kitchen. But as I passed the front door, something tugged at my attention. A pull, hardly noticeable, but insistent enough that I stopped. The window. I could see the faint outline of it. Just darkness framed in darkness. Nothing unusual. And yet, it felt wrong not to look, as if something were waiting for me outside, or on the other side of the glass. I checked my phone again. 3:17 a.m. I didn't yet know the significance of that minute, that second. But something inside me whispered, if you're going to look, do it now. I stepped closer. The old floorboards barely made a sound under my feet. My breath felt caught behind my ribs, suspended in the cold air. The world outside the window was pitch black. No moon, no stars. But the glass was shining faintly, as if lit from within by a pale, colourless glow. I leaned in, and at 3:18 a.m. exactly, the reflection in the window shifted. It was still me, but not the me standing in front of the glass. This version of me was outside, shivering, drenched in sweat, a thin line of blood trickling from my right temple. My eyes, they weren't looking at me. They were staring over my shoulder, toward something behind me inside the cottage. Something I could not see. I froze, because the reflection, my future self, began to whisper something. His mouth formed the words slowly, clearly. Just 3 words. Don't stay here. I stumbled back, heart thudding. The window went dark again. Just glass. Just me, breathing heavily in a quiet cottage that suddenly felt steeped in unseen weight. For the first time that night I understood the silence here. It wasn't peaceful. It was waiting. I didn't sleep after that. I sat on the sofa with every lamp on, listening to the house breathe, because that's what it felt like. Soft, rhythmic expansions of wood and stone, as if the cottage itself were inhaling and exhaling around me every few minutes. I glanced toward the front door, half expecting to see someone standing on the other side of the glass. But the window remained dark and still. Eventually, When the first pale hints of morning bled into the sky, I made myself a cup of tea. My hands trembled just enough to make the teaspoon clink against the mug. The warmth helped, but only a little. At around 8, I decided to go into the village. Kilduff wasn't much, just a crossroads with a small shop, a pub, a post office, and a church that had seen more funerals than weddings in recent years. Smoke was already curling from chimneys, rising into the damp air like grey ribbons. The shopkeeper, a man in his 60s named Martin, recognised me immediately. He always had a way of remembering faces despite claiming his memory was going. "Well, now look who's back," he said, handing me a basket without asking what I needed. "Haven't seen you in years. How's Eileen keeping?" "Doing well," I said. "She's in Galway for the week." He nodded. "Ah, that explains it. So you're staying out of the cottage?" There was a pause, not long enough to be rude, but long enough to mean something. I forced myself to speak casually. "Quiet place, at night." Martin gave me a knowing look, the kind people use when they're measuring whether to share something. "Aye," he said slowly. "Quiet can be different out there." I didn't want to sound paranoid, but I needed someone else's voice. Someone to tell me that what I saw at 3:18 a.m. was just a trick of sleep, or light, or imagination. So I asked, "Has anyone mentioned anything unusual about the cottage?" His expression tightened, just slightly. "Unusual how?" I hesitated. "The window." He didn't react, not in the way I expected. No surprise, no confusion, just stillness. Then he sighed and set down the loaf of bread he'd been slicing. "I was hoping you wouldn't say that." My pulse quickened. "So you know what I'm talking about?" "Aye," he said quietly. "Everyone around here does. We just don't call attention to it, because the thing seems to notice." I didn't understand what he meant, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. He leaned against the counter, lowering his voice. "It's been like that for generations. The cottage window. Only the one, mind you. The others are normal, but that front window, some say it's older than the house, built into the stone, long before a cottage ever stood there. No one knows who made it, or why." I swallowed. My throat felt dry again, like last night. "What does it do?" Martin looked toward the door to make sure no one was listening. "At exactly 3:18 a.m, if someone is near it, inside or outside, doesn't matter. The window wakes, that's what people say, and it shows a reflection, an hour into the future." My skin prickled. He continued, "Usually it shows harm, injury, loss, things you'd never want to see, but whatever it shows, it comes to pass, always." I didn't tell him exactly what I saw, not yet. "Has anyone ever changed the outcome?" I asked. His answer was immediate. "No." That single word felt like it settled deep in my bones. He straightened slowly, as if reminding himself there was work to do. "Some folks claim the window isn't really a warning. It's a promise, a fixed point, and the act of seeing it is what sets everything in motion." I clenched the edge of the counter. "So, if I hadn't looked, you'd still be safe," he said simply. For a moment, neither of us moved. The hum of the shop's old refrigerator filled the silence. Finally, Martin exhaled. "Did you see something?" I nodded. He didn't press for details. Instead, he walked around the counter and placed a gentle hand on my shoulder, something I didn't expect from a man who usually kept to himself. "Listen to me. Leave the cottage. Stay with family in town. Sleep in your car if you must, but don't go back there tonight." My stomach turned. I promised Eileen I'd watch the house. He shook his head. "Eileen won't mind if you value your life. That window doesn't give second chances." For a moment I nearly agreed, but something stubborn or foolish kept me from saying yes. Part of me didn't want to believe this was real. Another part wanted to face it, understand it, instead of running from a shadow. "I'll think about it," I said, though my voice lacked conviction. He looked disappointed, but not surprised. Before I left, he added one last thing. "If you're inside the cottage tonight, whatever you do, don't stand near the window at 3:18. Don't be awake. Don't even be in the same room." I nodded, buying far more groceries than I needed, just to avoid talking further. The walk back to the cottage felt different. The road seemed narrower. The air felt heavier, like a storm was gathering behind the clouds, even though the forecast promised clear skies. By the time I reached the gate, my hands were shaking. Inside, the cottage was exactly as I left it. But the window felt aware of me, as if it remembered what it had shown me last night, as if it were waiting for me to come close. I tried not to look directly at it as I put groceries away, but every few minutes my gaze drifted toward the glass anyway. In the daylight, it looked perfectly ordinary. No glow, no strange reflections, just sunlight bouncing off it. And yet, the thought lingered. At 3:18 a.m., that will change. As afternoon settled into early evening, I sat at the kitchen table with a notebook, trying to write down everything I'd seen, every detail, every expression on my reflection's face. I kept coming back to those 3 whispered words: "Don't stay here." He wasn't panicked. He wasn't screaming. He was pleading. In the quiet, I finally made myself ask the question I'd been avoiding. If that was truly me, why didn't I leave? What kept me here an hour later? I stared at the page, but no answer came. Not then. Not yet. Outside, the sky darkened. Inside, the air grew colder again. And when the cottage settled into nighttime silence, I knew. Despite Martin's warning, I wasn't leaving, not until I understood what waited for me at 3:18 a.m. I spent the rest of the evening trying to convince myself that fear was exaggerating everything, that the window was just a strange old pane of glass, and my mind, exhausted from the drive and the isolation, had simply conjured something unsettling. But denial is a fragile thing. It chips easily. By the time the clock crept toward midnight, that coldness in the cottage had returned, deeper, more intrusive, as though the house was gradually being emptied of all warmth. I moved from room to room, turning on lights, opening cupboards, checking corners without knowing what I was looking for. The smallest sounds unnerved me: the pop of cooling wood, the faint scratch of something against the roof, maybe a bird, maybe a loose branch. None of it should have mattered, but I knew what was coming. I should have listened to Martin. I should have left. Instead, I made myself a cup of tea. I barely drank, then sat in the armchair, facing the hearth, trying to stay awake without drifting into that half-conscious state where imagination scrapes too close to reality. 1:07 a.m. I checked the clock more often than necessary, as if knowing the time would make any of this safer. I told myself I wouldn't approach the window, that I'd stay as far from it as possible. But even from across the room I could feel its presence, silent, unblinking, patient. It wasn't just a piece of the house anymore. It felt like a second occupant. I pulled the blanket tighter around my shoulders. 1:54 a.m. The cottage groaned with the deep settling sounds of old timber, the kind of noises you hear in any rural house in the early hours. But this time, each creak felt purposeful, each shift in the air felt directed, as if the house was slowly adjusting itself around me, positioning me, preparing me. A couple of times I got up and checked the front door, making sure it was locked even though I knew it already was. The dark shape of the window sat beside it, faintly reflecting the room but refusing to show any detail. The longer I avoided looking at it directly, the heavier the pull became. By 2:40 a.m, my heart was steady but too alert, beating with that strange rhythm between fight and surrender. And then, around 2:58, I felt something change. The cottage fell into a silence so complete it pressed against my ears. No wind, no settling wood, no distant animal sounds. Nothing. Just a vacuum of sound, like the world outside had taken a breath and never released it. The air grew colder. I stood, slowly, without thinking, without deciding. My feet moved toward the front door in soft, slow steps, as if guided, as if expected. I wanted to stop. I truly did. But there was something irresistible about the window, as though my reflection, wherever it was in that future hour, was pulling me forward, urging me to witness the next inevitable piece of the puzzle. The clock on my phone glowed in my hand. 3:11 a.m. 7 minutes. I could still turn back. I could still walk away. I could go to bed and pull the blanket over my head and pretend none of this existed. But something deeper, something instinctive, told me that the moment I resisted the window would be the moment it became dangerous. As long as I followed its rhythm, I felt not safe, but allowed. I reached the door. I stood in front of the window. My breath fogged the glass. I closed my eyes. Just don't open them, I whispered to myself. Let the minute pass. If I didn't see the reflection, maybe nothing would happen. Maybe the future couldn't root itself without being witnessed. I don't know how long I stood there like that. Eyes shut, chest rising and falling in slow, deliberate breaths. But eventually, curiosity began to swallow fear. Not curiosity about what I'd see. Curiosity about what the window wanted. Because by then I was certain it wanted something. My pulse thudded in my ears. 3:17:40 a.m. I knew what time it was without looking. I could feel the approach of that magnet-like static crawling across my skin, tiny invisible fingers brushing the back of my neck. My eyelids twitched. 20 seconds. 10. 5. A single breath. And then, 3:18 a.m. I opened my eyes. The window glowed again, soft, pale, unnatural. But this time the reflection was not standing outside. It was inside the cottage. It was me, 1 hour into the future, sitting in the armchair by the hearth, but not relaxed, not resting, frozen. My face was twisted in terror. My hands gripped the arms of the chair so tightly the knuckles were white. My lips were parted as if screaming, though the reflection made no sound, and behind me, behind the future version of me, was a shape, tall, dark, indistinct, but unmistakably human. A figure standing just behind the chair, leaning close to my future ear, as if whispering something I could not hear. My stomach turned to ice. I stepped closer to the window despite myself, breath fogging the glass. The reflection leaned slightly, allowing me to see something that hadn't been visible at first. The door behind the armchair, the door to the small back room, was open in the reflection, but in the real cottage behind me I knew the door was closed. I always kept it closed. Slowly, terrified, but unable to stop, I turned my head to look at the real door. It was closed, locked even. When I looked back at the window, my reflection in the glass, future me, snapped its gaze forward, and for the first time, it wasn't looking past me. It wasn't looking over my shoulder. It was looking directly into my eyes. Its lips moved. 4 words this time. 4 words I understood perfectly. Don't let it in. The glow vanished. The glass went dark. The cottage sighed, a long, deep exhale, as if something had just settled into place. Somewhere behind me, in the silence of the house, I heard a soft, deliberate click, the click of a door latch, from the back room. The room I knew I'd locked, the room that was supposed to stay closed, a settling beam, a shifting window frame, those you learn to forgive, but a door latch lifting, slowly, deliberately. That is the sound of intention. And that is what I heard. A soft metallic click coming from the back room. A room I had locked. A room the window had shown open in the future. For a moment I couldn't breathe. The cottage seemed to thicken around me, the air growing heavy, almost syrupy. My hands tingled as though all the blood had retreated from them. I stared at the hallway, at the shadowed slice of wall where the door to the back room waited just out of sight. There was no movement, no footsteps, no shift of wood or whisper of fabric, just silence, deep, absorbing silence. My first instinct was to turn on every light in the cottage, but the lamps were already on. They didn't seem to help. Their warm glow stopped short of the hallway, as if the darkness beyond them wasn't ordinary darkness, but something with depth, something you could almost lean into. I stood perfectly still, listening. My heart felt too loud. Each beat thudded in my ears like a muffled drum. I didn't want to walk toward the room, but I couldn't make myself walk away either. It was as though my body were caught between 2 invisible ropes, fear pulling me back, curiosity dragging me forward. Eventually, I managed a single whisper to myself. Don't let it in. My reflection had said those words. Future me, the one who sat terrified in the armchair, rigid with whatever presence loomed behind him. If something was coming from that back room, If something wanted to enter the main part of the cottage, my only job apparently was to stop it. But how? And what was it? I moved very slowly, each step quiet on the floorboards. I didn't dare turn my back to the window. Instead, I circled around so it stayed to my left, like a distant witness. The hallway was colder, much colder, as if the temperature dropped 10 degrees the moment I crossed a certain invisible line. My breath came out in thin, pale wisps. The hairs along my arms were standing, prickled by the sense of eyes watching me from nowhere and everywhere. The door to the back room was still closed, just barely. The latch had lifted, yes, but the door itself remained in place, pressed against the frame but not fully secured. A faint draft pushed against it from inside the room, making it shiver almost imperceptibly. I swallowed hard. My throat felt raw, as if I'd been breathing smoke. With trembling fingers, I reached out and touched the doorknob. It was freezing, not cool metal. No, it was like touching the surface of a stone that had lain in winter water for years. I jerked my hand away, on instinct. For a moment I considered calling out, saying something, announcing myself, but the cottage didn't feel like it wanted sound. Even my breathing seemed too loud. Instead, I pressed my ear to the wooden door, listening for anything inside. At first, nothing. Then slowly a faint noise surfaced, a soft, rhythmic whisper. Not words, not breathing, more like movement, fabric brushing against fabric, the tiny scrape of something shifting weight. Someone or something was in that room. I stepped back. I wanted to run. My legs, however, had the heavy stiffness of an old dream. That dream where you try to flee but the ground seems to cling to your feet like thick mud. The only thing that kept me from bolting out the front door was the memory of what future me had looked like in the reflection, paralysed, staring at the thing behind him. If I left the hallway, if I sat in that armchair, if I let that door open fully, would I be fulfilling the future exactly as shown? The window didn't warn. It predicted. It promised. I couldn't let its vision come true. Not entirely. So I forced myself closer. My hand hovered over the knob. I squeezed my eyes shut once, as though bracing for a blow. Then I acted. Not bravely, not confidently, but desperately. I turned the knob fully and slammed the door shut. The latch didn't engage. The cold metal resisted, refusing to slide back into its slot. It felt as though something on the other side was pushing lightly, not aggressively, but firmly enough to keep the mechanism misaligned. "No," I whispered through clenched teeth. "Please, no." I leaned into the door, pressing my shoulder against the wood. The resistance increased, subtle at first, then more pronounced, as though the thing inside realized what I was doing. The door shuddered, softly. My heartbeat hammered so violently I thought I might faint, but I kept pushing, every muscle taut, every nerve screaming. And then, click, the latch slid fully home, the door sealed. Instantly the resistance vanished, as if whatever had been behind it simply stepped back, letting me win the moment but not the night. The temperature in the hallway rose by a few degrees, not warm, but less deathly cold. with sweat. My legs trembled. When I reached the edge of the living room, I turned, expecting to see the window glowing again, calling me, showing me what came next. But it was dark, lifeless, just glass catching the dim reflection of the lamp. Yet something in its silence felt almost satisfied, as if I had done exactly what I was supposed to do. Or worse, exactly what it wanted. I didn't return to the hallway that night. I sat on the sofa, knees pulled close, watching the front door and the window as if they were the only stable truths in the world. I tried keeping myself awake, but exhaustion has its own gravity. Around 4:20 a.m., I finally drifted off. My dreams were muted and grey, empty landscapes, shifting shadows. The sound of a door latch lifting over and over and over again. When I woke, the cottage was warm with morning light. For a moment I thought it had all been a nightmare, but the hallway still felt colder. The door still bore faint scratches, long, thin marks running down the paint, marks that hadn't been there the day before, and my reflection's warning echoed in my mind. Don't let it in. But what was it? And why did the window want me to see it? I didn't step near the back room again that morning. I moved through the cottage carefully, deliberately, as though each piece of furniture might shift if I startled it. The kettle hissed softly while it boiled, and even that sound made me flinch. The house felt different now, not hostile, not welcoming, just watchful. When I finally gathered the courage to look toward the window, daylight made it seem perfectly ordinary again, innocent, harmless, a pane of glass in an old door frame. But I knew better. I kept hearing the words in my head like a pulse. Don't let it in. Whatever had been behind that door last night wasn't human. Nothing human freezes a doorknob solid or pushes against a door without sound or breath. Yet it wasn't mindless or random either. It moved with purpose, with patience. I needed answers, and since I wasn't getting them from the cottage, I decided to get them from the village. I drove back to Kilduff late that morning. The road winding between low stone walls, slick with damp moss. The fields, still heavy with fog, looked like they were holding their breath. Even the sheep seemed quiet, as though the land itself was aware of what lived behind the cottage walls. The shop bell chimed when I stepped inside. Martin looked up from restocking a shelf and froze the moment he saw me. "You look terrible," he said bluntly. "I didn't sleep well." His expression darkened. "You stayed, then?" I nodded. He exhaled slowly and set down the stack of tins he was holding. "All right. Before you explain anything, tell me this. Did you go near that window again at that time?" "Yes." He closed his eyes like the answer physically hurt him. "And?" he asked. I could still feel the cold doorknob searing my fingertips. I could still hear the scrape of something shifting in the dark room. "The window showed me inside the cottage," I said quietly, "in the armchair, and someone was behind me." Martin's jaw clenched. "Not someone. Don't call it that." "What is it?" He motioned for me to follow him into the back of the shop. We slipped behind a curtain into a cramped little room filled with papers, old photographs, and stacked crates of Guinness. He closed the door behind us. "Sit," he said. I did. He rummaged rummaged through a drawer until he pulled out a thin folder, yellowed with age. When he opened it, the smell of old paper filled the air, dry, earthy, almost comforting. Inside were photographs of the cottage, some dated back decades, some almost a century. In every photo, the same window was there, the same narrow rectangle of glass, untouched by time. "This window," he said, tapping the photo, "is older than the cottage by at least 200 years. "That doesn't make sense," I said. "That's what we all thought too." He sighed. "But the original stone ledger for that strip of land says something peculiar. Before any dwelling stood there, there was a wall, a lone, free-standing wall of limestone, in the middle of what used to be bogland." "A wall," I repeated. He nodded. "A wall with a window frame built into it." My skin prickled. Who builds a window into a wall with no house? No one knows. The records stopped there, and the people who lived nearby back then didn't leave much behind, not in writing anyway. But there are stories. I leaned forward. "Tell me." He hesitated before speaking. "They say the window wasn't made to look out of. It was made to look into." I felt a slow chill slide through me. "Into what?" I asked. "The other side." His voice lowered, almost a whisper. "Not the afterlife, not anything religious, just something parallel. A place where time doesn't behave like it should." I stared at him, waiting for the joke that wasn't coming. "So, the window shows the future. Only the future you're on track to meet. Only the path you've already started walking." He closed the folder. "It doesn't show possibilities. It shows certainties." "But why harm?" I asked. "Why does it always show something terrible?" Martin's eyes softened with something like pity. "Because whatever's on the other side feeds on outcomes, and fear is the strongest outcome there is." My stomach tightened. "So, the thing in the back room that comes from the window?" "Not exactly." He scratched his jaw. "The window doesn't bring anything into this world, but it can open places that should stay closed. If you see a future where something enters your home, then you open the way for it. So seeing the reflection makes the future happen. Not by magic," he said, "by preparation, by fear, by the choices you make trying to avoid it." I swallowed. The memory of pushing against the door came back sharply. "What happens if someone lets it in?" I asked.
Martin didn't immediately answer.
He simply looked at me, long enough that I began to understand the shape of the truth in his silence. Finally, he said, "They don't stay themselves." A cold pressure settled in my chest. "What do you mean?" "People who've let it in don't come back right. Their voices change, their eyes change, they stop recognizing their families, they wander at night. Some say they walk toward the bog and never return." I stared at the photographs, those old, faded images of the window that had never aged. "So, what do I do?" I asked, my voice thin. "How do I stop it?" "You don't stop it," he said gently. "You just keep it out, and you never, ever look at that window again." "But last night—" "You should leave the house today," he finished. "Right now. Pack your things, lock the door, and walk away." I asked. No. His answer came too quickly. But distance makes it harder for what's behind that door to reach you. What about the next night? You won't be there for it. I nodded slowly, absorbing his words, but something in me resisted. I can't leave, I said. Not yet. Martin stared at me with a mixture of fear and something like grief. That's exactly what the others said, he whispered. I returned to the cottage that afternoon, the folder's images imprinted in my mind. The window didn't glow. The house didn't feel colder. Everything was perfectly still. But the hallway remained slightly cooler, and the scratches on the back room's door seemed a fraction deeper, as though something inside had touched them again. And again, waiting for night, waiting for 3:18 a.m., waiting for me to make just one wrong choice. I didn't sleep after the second reflection. Not really. At best, I sank into a kind of shallow drift, my body weightless, my mind heavy, my nerves humming, like a wire pulled too tight. Even with the hotel curtains closed, even with my phone powered off, the room felt bright, as though something unseen was watching through the walls. At 3:18 a.m., I found myself awake again. Not outside, not anywhere close to the waking window. But my heart raced anyway, beating like something was knocking from inside my ribcage. By morning, I felt brittle, like a ceramic figure that had been dropped and glued back together, cracks hidden under paint. I told myself I had to leave this village. I told myself that whatever curiosity brought me here had already been satisfied. More than satisfied. It had been fed until it was feral, uncontrollable, and cruel. I was done with reflections that didn't belong to me. Done with glimpses of futures that felt too real to ignore. But then I stepped outside, and the fog convinced me otherwise. A fog too heavy. The village was quiet in a way that didn't make sense for the hour. Not dead, no, not silent, just muffled, as if I had walked into a place dipped in thick wool. Fog rolled across the fields in slow, deliberate coils. I could barely see 10 meters ahead, and when a shape passed through the grey distance, a cow, I think, its outline wavered as though the fog was swallowing it. I stood there at the edge of the lane and felt the air press against my chest. This wasn't the same fog as yesterday. This one felt like it had weight, like it was sitting on me, not passing by me. I told myself it was just the humidity. Just the hills, just the Atlantic. But the truth slipped out before I could swallow it. I felt watched, not from behind me, not from above, but from a very specific direction. Southwest, toward the cottage, the waking window, Father Rian's warning. That's when I heard the footsteps. Not hurried, not hesitant, just slow and steady, like someone had been searching for me, but wasn't worried about catching up. Father Rian stepped out of the fog, his coat damp, his hair matted from the mist. You shouldn't be outside in this, he said. His voice was low, not scolding, afraid. I'm leaving today, I told him. I've seen enough. He studied me with an expression that reminded me of someone reading a funeral notice with their own name on it. You've seen twice now, he asked quietly. I nodded. 3 is the pattern, he murmured. 3 is when it becomes permanent. A chill trickled down my spine. Permanent how? He didn't answer immediately. He took off his glasses and wiped them with his sleeve, though the lens only fogged more. Whatever it shows the third time, he said finally, is the one you cannot escape. I waited for him to continue, but he didn't. What happens if you don't go? I asked. He lifted his eyes to mine. The window doesn't care if you go, it cares if you return. That made no sense, yet it made too much sense. If you've seen it twice, he said, you're already marked by it. It has your shape now, your outline, your future. You walk around thinking you're separate, but you're only echoing what it already knows. My mouth went dry. You think I'm going to see it again tonight? I think, he said, that you're going to try not to, and that's exactly how it pulls people back. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. Do you feel it? I swallowed. What? His gaze sharpened. The tug. A word so simple, yet it slid into me like a cold blade, because I'd felt something. Since dawn, a low magnetic pull from far away. Not a thought, a direction. Southwest. The cottage. I didn't answer him, but he knew. He nodded once, as though confirming something with himself. Then you must make a choice, he said, before nightfall. What choice? Stay awake. Stay inside. Do not step outside at 3:18, or... He hesitated. Face it. The fog thickened between us until he was just a silhouette. Father, I said, my voice thin, what happens if someone faces it a third time? His silhouette didn't move. The window shows you, he whispered, what it must take. The pull strengthens. The hours after that were blurry. Fog clung to me no matter where I walked. The air felt heavier. The village felt smaller. And the tug, that subtle, quiet, dragging sensation, grew stronger. At one point I turned down the wrong lane and ended up walking toward the hills without realizing it. I stopped only when I caught a glimpse of a fence that I hadn't seen before. My body had steered me there like a sleepwalker guided by invisible hands. Twice I caught myself checking the time compulsively. 3 times I felt the urge to ask someone, anyone, what they would do in my place. And once, just once, I thought I saw a figure in the fog ahead, standing still, facing me. But when I blinked, it dissolved. By late afternoon, the tug wasn't subtle anymore. It wasn't quiet. It wasn't gentle. It felt like the cottage was pulling a thread, tied to the back of my skull. I decided then I wouldn't let it win. I would stay inside, lock the door, put on headphones, hide under the blankets if I had to. There was no way I would step outside at 3:18. I made that promise to myself at 6:40 p.m. I broke it at 3:12 a.m. The unwanted walk. I don't remember deciding to leave the room. I don't remember unlocking the door. I don't remember walking down the stairs. All I recall is this. I was suddenly standing outside the hotel, the cold mist curling against my skin, my breath visible in the dim air. My phone screen glowed in my hand. 3:12 a.m. My heart seized. No, I whispered. But it didn't feel like my whisper. It felt like the breath was leaving my mouth without my consent. I tried to turn back toward the door, but my legs were already moving down the lane. The fog parted around me like it recognized me. Every step felt both forced and completely natural, like my body was following a path it had always known. Stop, I told myself. Turn around, just turn around. I didn't. 3:14 a.m. I walked faster, not because I wanted to, but because the pull was stronger now, humming against the inside of my skull. 3:15 a.m. The cottage was close. Too close. I could see the faint outline of the roof emerging from the fog, like a shape rising from deep water. I felt tears burning at the corners of my eyes. Please, I whispered, I don't want to see it again. The fog didn't care. 3:16 a.m. The lane sloped downward. My feet kept moving. The night felt colder. My breathing turned into small gasps. A shape materialized ahead. The cottage, just as I remembered it. Small, lonely, waiting, and above the stone wall, the window, still, dark, silent. 3:17 a.m. I stopped breathing altogether. The fog thinned just enough that I could see the glass clearly. Empty, quiet, dead. And then a faint tremor in the pane. Not a sound, not a light, just a subtle stirring, like the window itself inhaled. My throat tightened. The glass shifted again. Waking. I whispered a prayer I didn't know I remembered, and then the digital glow of my phone shifted. 3:18 a.m. The window opened its eyes. The third reflection. The surface of the glass rippled once, like water touched by a fingertip. A shape appeared. My shape. But not like before. Not bleeding, not running, not panicked. The third reflection stood perfectly still. My reflection's face was calm, expression blank, eyes wide and glassy. My head leaned slightly to one side, as though listening to something behind me. I froze. Slowly, the reflection raised one hand. Its fingers curled, pointed, toward the back of my head. I felt the breath leave my lungs. I didn't want to turn around. I didn't dare turn around. But the reflection's hand trembled, insisting, pointing at something standing right behind me. I choked out a broken gasp. My reflection mouthed one word, a single syllable, silent, barely formed, but unmistakable. Run! The window went dark, and something exhaled behind me. I should probably explain what happened in the minutes after the lantern went out, because that's when the cottage stopped feeling like an abandoned structure and started feeling aware of me. When the darkness fell, it wasn't silent. There was a shift, like the cottage exhaled, after holding its breath for years. The air warmed slightly, enough that the back of my neck prickled. I didn't move at first. I just stood there, scribbling tiny circles with my thumb on the recorder, trying to pretend I hadn't just seen myself bleeding in that glass. The reflection hadn't shown a wound on my arm. It showed my whole sleeve, soaked. I remember whispering that was a trick of the light. Just a trick. felt like lying to myself. The floorboards behind me gave a soft, slow creak, not sharp, not sudden, but like someone shifting their weight after standing still for a long time. I turned. Nothing. Just the silhouette of a table, a tin cup, the faint line of the front door. I moved the recorder closer to my mouth so the mic wouldn't pick up the sound of my breathing. You'll hear in the audio, if I ever decide to release it, a soft hiss under every word that was me trying not to panic. I walked slowly to the door, not running. Running inside a place like that felt like the exact kind of behaviour that made old stories come true. My hand pressed against the cold iron latch, and then the window behind me flashed white. Not a light, not a beam, more like it blinked, a single, soft pulse, as though the glass itself had opened and closed an eye. I didn't want to look. Every part of my body begged me not to, but you know how it goes with fear. Your head turns before your mind decides anything. The window was awake again, and in it my reflection stood perfectly still, except the blood was no longer only on the sleeve. In the reflection, it had reached the collar, creeping up like rising tide. I reached for my shoulder. Dry. Completely dry. Somewhere in the cottage, deeper in the dark, something scraped across the floor. I froze. Then a second scrape. Closer. I whispered, "I'm leaving. I'm leaving now." As if announcing it out loud would grant me safe passage, but the latch didn't give. The door didn't budge. It felt as though someone on the other side lightly pressed their palm against it, holding it closed, not forcefully, just with the stubbornness of a person refusing to let you pass. The scraping stopped, and then a slow inhale. Not mine. It came from the far side of the room, heavy and deliberate, the way someone breathes through their nose when they're listening. The only thing I could think to do was keep my eyes fixed on the window, because in every version of the tale, that reflection was the warning, the early, preventable version of the ending, and the reflection had changed again. Now the future me had both hands raised slightly, like I was bracing against something or someone. I took a step back from the door. The floorboard beneath me moaned, long and low. The inhale from the other side of the room stopped. Then the cottage. Every nail, every board, every piece of rusted hinge shifted together with a dry, wooden sigh, and something touched my sleeve. Just a pinch, 2 fingers, light as a curious child. I jerked away, stumbling toward the window by instinct, not logic. This was the exact wrong thing to do, I know. But when the dark behind you feels occupied, you move toward the only thing that shows you yourself. The window flickered again, and this time the reflection leaned forward. Not me. It. Future me pressed its palm against the inside of the glass. The blood on its shirt had spread high across the collarbone. I raised my hand, hesitant, trembling, not to match it, but to see if my real palm was wet. It wasn't, but the air behind me changed again. It thickened, warmed, moved. Someone dash, or something dash, was standing closer close enough that I should have felt a breath on my neck. Except there was no breath, just presence. I didn't think. I didn't hesitate. I threw my shoulder into the door with everything I had. The latch snapped. The wood splintered outward. Cold night air rushed over me like a breaking wave. I stumbled out onto the grass, not running, not yet, just gulping at the wind like I'd surfaced from underwater. The cottage behind me stayed dark. No movement, no footsteps following. But the window, it glowed fainter now like a low ember, and my reflection, my future dash was gone. Whatever event it had shown me was no longer 1 hour away. It was already in motion, and the sleeve of my shirt, the real one, began to feel warm, wet. When I looked down, I saw the first spreading bloom of red, exactly where the window had shown it. Nothing had touched me, nothing had cut me, but the glass had been right. It always was. I wish I could tell you that I ran straight back to the village, pounding the dirt track with every ounce of fear in me. But it didn't happen like that. The moment I stepped out of the cottage grounds, the world felt shifted, not changed, not warped, just tilted, like something subtle had moved out of alignment. Even the night air seemed thicker, like walking through a breath someone else had just exhaled. I kept one hand clamped over my sleeve, feeling the warmth of the blood that shouldn't have been there. Not because it hurt, it didn't, but because every time I lifted my palm, the warmth spread a little more. Slow, inevitable, like the cottage had decided the wound would exist, and the world was adjusting to honour that. I followed the old track toward the village, the gravel crunching softly under my boots. The rhythm of it should have calmed me. Steps are grounding, predictable, countable. But between each footfall I heard an extra sound, a second crunch, out of sync, far too close. I didn't look back. I don't think anything in me could have handled confirming that I wasn't walking alone. So I kept my gaze forward, fixed on the distant shape of the hedgerows lining the road. The night in County Clare is never truly silent. There's always wind brushing the fields and distant water moving through the boglands. But that night, the natural sounds felt muffled, pushed into the background. What stood out instead was the low hum in my ears, like pressure building behind the eardrums. At first, I thought it was panic, but then the hum changed, shifted pitch, deepened, and in the hum, I swear, though I know how strange it sounds, I heard words not spoken, not whispered, just implied, a tone shaped like language without forming it. I walked faster, and the second set of footsteps beneath mine kept pace, always half a beat too slow, like whatever followed hadn't yet learned how to mimic the rhythm of a person fully. I reached the first bend in the road, the one that leads past the old stone wall that locals say once marked the boundary of a clan burial ground. I should have kept moving. I should have followed the curve and headed down toward the faint glow of the village lamps. But I didn't, because just before that bend, the wind died completely, and the soft crunching behind me stopped, not faded, not slowed, stopped, like something was waiting. I turned only my head, slow enough that I wouldn't startle whatever stood behind me, fast enough that I wouldn't lose the nerve. The road behind me was empty, but the mist wasn't. A low fog had slipped across the field while I walked, so quietly I hadn't noticed it. It gathered thickest around the path, swirling along the gravel like fingers closing around the ankles. And in the centre of it, right where my footprints ended, stood a darker shape. Not a figure, not fully, more like the suggestion of a person. A vertical smudge, almost the consistency of smoke, rising and folding in on itself, as though it had only just discovered a shape to imitate. I didn't breathe. The shape leaned forward slightly, and the hum in my ears dropped to a lower register, like someone trying to speak through deep water. Then, the figure snapped out of sight. No drift, no dissolve. Just gone, like someone had erased it with a single stroke. The road fell silent again. I turned back toward the village, my pulse hammering hard enough to shake the bones in my wrist, and I began to walk faster. But after only a few steps, the hum returned, stronger, clearer, and in it, wrapped deep in the vibration, I heard something impossible to misinterpret, closer now. Not words spoken aloud, not a voice, but the meaning of them slid into my head like a cold hand around the spine. I broke into a run. The road behind me erupted in sound, footsteps pounding hard, too many, too fast, hitting the gravel as though the fog had given birth to an entire crowd. I didn't look. I didn't dare. The only thing that mattered was the orange glow of the village lights ahead, flickering through the trees like the last safe embers of a dying fire. My sleeve grew wetter, warmth creeping toward the elbow, reality rearranging itself to match the reflection. I stumbled into the first circle of lamplight, falling to my knees, gasping air like it was something I'd been deprived of for hours. The footsteps behind me stopped instantly, every one of them. Silence fell with a weight. I slowly turned. The road was empty. Even the fog had retreated. But at the very edge of the lamplight, right where the light began to thin into shadow, something stood, not the smudged shape from before. This time it was clearer, more upright, more familiar. It had my height, my shoulders, my outline. It stepped forward once, just enough for the light to brush the edge of its face, and it looked like me, except the eyes weren't mine. They were too open, too still, too awake. I blinked and the figure collapsed inward, like dust caught in a gust of wind, gone before the lamplight could touch it. And just like that, the road was empty again. But I knew, with the kind of certainty that weighs on the lungs, that the cottage's reflection wasn't predicting something anymore. It was sending something, and it had found me. It took me nearly 10 minutes to steady my breathing enough to stand again. The lamplight around me felt like the only thing holding the night at bay. A soft, orange halo, fragile as old parchment, yet it kept the road behind me quiet, still, watchful. I leaned against the post, gripping the wooden frame with both hands. The blood, soaking my sleeve, had finally begun to cool, turning the fabric stiff. When I pressed my fingers against my arm, expecting to find a tear or cut, I found nothing. Not even a bruise, just skin, untouched, had shown me. The injury wasn't physical. Not fully. I looked down the road again, half expecting my figure, to reappear, but the darkness beyond the lamplight held steady, silent, patient. It felt like a door waiting to open only if I dared step toward it. I didn't. Instead, I headed deeper into the village. Most of the houses were dark. Only 2 windows glowed faintly, the pub at the crossroad and the McKenna's cottage. I went to the pub first, driven more by instinct than plan. The door creaked when I pushed it open. A single lamp inside cast a warm halo over the counter, where the owner, Declan, sat wiping a glass, as if he'd been waiting for someone to give him a reason not to close. He looked up when I entered, and his face changed, not in surprise, in recognition. "You went up there," he said quietly, voice low and tired. It wasn't a question. "I did," I admitted. He set the glass down, his hand suddenly still. "And did it look back at you?" I hesitated. It showed me, bleeding, an hour into the future, and now. I lifted my arm. This. Declan didn't come closer. He didn't reach out. He just nodded once, like someone hearing a story. They already knew the ending too. "That's how it begins," he murmured. "Not the bleeding, the following, the shape that tries on your outline." My pulse quickened. What happens next? He didn't answer at first. Instead he stood, walked to the back wall and pulled down an old iron lantern. Its surface was warped, scorched in strange places, like it had been too close to a fire that wasn't meant to burn. He set it on the table between us. "Every person who saw themselves in that window," he said, "was found within a day or 2. Some just vanished. Some were taken apart in ways that never made natural sense, but all of them said the same thing first." I swallowed. "What?" "That they saw themselves watching." The pub seemed to shrink around me, walls bending closer with every breath. "Did you?" he asked. I nodded. "On the road. I think it was me, or something, wearing my shape." Declan exhaled through his teeth. "Then you've less time than most." The lantern flickered, though it wasn't lit, a faint pulse of light, like a heartbeat. "What do I do?" I asked. He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he motioned for me to sit, then lowered himself into the chair across from me. "You listen carefully," he said, "because you'll only get one chance to do this without dying." I leaned forward. "The window doesn't show the future." "Not really. It shows the moment you are no longer yourself." He tapped the lantern. "And what returns after isn't you." A chill crawled up my spine. "I don't understand." "The cottage steals the hour it shows in the glass, and something uses that stolen hour to step in wearing your skin." I stared at my reflection in the pub's window, pale, shaken, trembling, and behind me for the briefest moment I saw another silhouette layered over mine, like a second reflection trying to catch up. Declan leaned closer. "You've already lost half the hour. Once it finishes taking its shape, it replaces you, quietly, without struggle. People say it feels like falling asleep while standing up." The hum I'd heard on the road returned faintly in my ears, as if hearing his name called forth its presence. I pressed my palm to my forehead. revealed a piece of darkened iron etched with a crude symbol, a circle with a single cut through the top. "You go back," he said, "to the cottage, and you demand the hour back." The blood on my sleeve had spread to my wrist now, slow, inevitable. "Why would it give it back?" I whispered. "Because it never expects anyone to ask." My pulse thudded in my ears. What if I fail? Declan's expression softened. "Then the shape becomes you, and you become the thing trapped behind the glass." The lantern flickered again. This time I felt the pulse in my chest answer it, a sink, a claiming. I stood. My legs trembled but held. "I'll go," I said. Declan handed me the lantern. Its weight surprised me, heavy as a stone, humming faintly with something too old to feel comfortable holding. "When the window wakes," he said, "you stand in front of it, you look at yourself, and you say 3 words." "What words?" "Give me back. That's all." He nodded. "Say them before the hour runs out." I stepped toward the door. "And one more thing," he added. I turned. "If the reflection smiles, you run. It means you're already too late." The road back to the cottage was darker than before. Even the moon seemed to dim as I approached the boundary wall, like the sky itself didn't want to witness what came next. The cottage stood silent, asleep, waiting. I climbed the steps, lantern held tight in both palms. The moment I crossed the threshold, the air warmed, sudden, heavy, as though the cottage recognized me. The window was dark, empty, blind. I stepped toward it. The lantern in my hand pulsed once. The window blinked open. My reflection appeared instantly, but not quite right. It stood too still, shoulders too relaxed, eyes too calm. Blood soaked its collar entirely now, and then, slowly, the reflection lifted its chin, just a fraction, and its lips curled upward. A smile. I froze. Every warning screamed through my body. Run, turn, leave everything. But my legs wouldn't move. The warmth on my sleeve surged like a second heartbeat. The hum in my skull deepened, pressing inward, warping thought into fog. The reflection stepped closer to the glass. Its smile widened, not cruel, not angry, but content, claiming. I forced breath into my lungs. "Give me back." That's what I was supposed to say. I opened my mouth and felt a second set of lungs inside me inhale. My voice caught. The reflection mirrored my struggle perfectly, fingers twitching like it was waiting for the final moment to replace me. My vision blurred. The world thinned. The room tilted sideways like sleep pulling me under. Number. I slammed the lantern against my own chest. The metal seared through the fabric, hot, blinding, and a shock tore through me like a cord snapped inside my ribs. The reflection's eyes widened. The smile broke. I drew breath, ragged and shaking, and forced the words out through grinding teeth. "Give me back." The window shuddered. Not the glass, but the space behind it. Something recoiled. My reflection tilted its head, face twisting as though gripped by invisible hands. Its shape folded, distorted, unravelling like smoke torn apart by wind. I shouted again, "Give me back!" The reflection imploded, a silent, collapsing scream. The glass went white, bursting with a flash of impossible cold, and all at once, the warmth in my sleeve vanished. The hum broke, the air snapped clear. When the window cleared, my reflection returned. Just me, breathless, terrified, alive. I didn't wait. I didn't speak. I ran from the cottage and didn't stop until the dawn broke over the fields. Behind me, the window stayed dark, silent, empty. I left County Clare the next morning, not because I wanted to, but because staying felt like inviting the hour back in, like the window would eventually notice the hour it gave up and come collecting. Declan didn't say goodbye. He just nodded once, like he knew anyone who survived the window never stayed long. I still don't sleep well. Some nights I wake at 3:18 exactly, a habit my body learned without permission. I never look at the glass when it happens, not the phone screen, not the dark window by the bed, not even my reflection in the bathroom tap, because if the window ever wakes again, I don't want to know what shape stands behind mine now, and I don't ask for the hour back a second time. No one ever has. If you travel through County Clare, the locals won't tell you about the cottage unless you ask directly, and even then, most will pretend they've never heard the story. But if you look closely, if you pay attention to the way people avoid the old road after dark, or how they glance at the windows of empty houses, like they're checking for breath, you'll understand something. They don't fear the cottage, they fear the hour, the one that doesn't belong to you, but somehow finds you anyway. So here's my warning. The only one that matters, if you're ever out at night anywhere at all, and you see your reflection move a little too slowly or a little too eagerly, if it smiles before you do, don't wait, don't look twice, and whatever you do, don't let it finish